I feel like I sound better when I bring my voice deeper.
Yes.
Because when I'm up here.
Oh, I can't even do it.
Hello, Wanderers. I'm Jess.
And I'm Hannah.
And welcome to Wicked Wanderings.
Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Jess.
How's it going?
It's going. How's it going for you?
You know what? It's going. My head's above water. That's all that matters, right?
Yes, I agree with that. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Are you excited to have yet another episode on the Salem Witch Trials?
I am so ready.
Okay. Let's get into it because you guys are going to hear my voice a lot. So last week we ended on the accusations against Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse, and we realized that we hate Ann Putnam because she accused a freaking 4-year-old girl, Dorothy Good, the daughter of Sarah Good, right?
That's the one who made the thing with the dog pee or no,
No, that
urine,
was
right?
Mary Sibley.
Oh, I'm never going to get this.
And she was never accused. I double checked that over the week and she was never accused of witchcraft. The witch pea cake lady.
That makes no sense, but okay.
Yeah, none of this does. That's what I'm saying. So Ann Putnam accused a 4-year-old girl, Dorothy Good, the daughter of Sarah Good. And on March 21st, Corwin and Hawthorne examined Corey, Martha Corey, and heard enough evidence to put her in jail to await trial, along with the 4-year-old Dorothy Good. 2 days later, on March 23rd, and then Rebecca Nurse on March 24th. So now in jail, we have Tituba, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, Martha Corey, and Dorothy Good, and Rebecca Nurse. So that's 6 people in jail in just 1 month's time. Actually, 2 months, if you consider January is when the fits first started. This is the time Mary Warren and Mercy Lewis enter the scene. 20-year-old orphan Mary Warren, not my Mary Warren, and was John and Elizabeth Proctor's servant. According to Emerson Baker, Mary had shown early signs of affliction, yet recovered when John Proctor threatened to thresh her, and she just happened to not have any more fits.
Thresh her?
Yeah, like he beat her.
God.
Yeah, different times. John Proctor told a neighbor that if left to the devices of the afflicted, we should all be devils and witches quickly. Proctor felt that a trip to the whipping post for the afflicted would have ended the accusations. So basically, if they just beat all the accusers, yeah.
That's so archaic.
Right? But as we will find out, this was not the end of Mary Warren's involvement. Mercy Lewis was also an orphan, a result of the Native American raids in Maine, and she also happened to be the Putnam's maidservant. On April 3rd, 1692, Sarah Cloyce was accused of witchcraft after walking out of one of Samuel Parris's sermons regarding witchcraft. Why did she do this, you ask? I know you're wondering.
Well, if they walk out, that's a no-no.
Yeah, that's not a good thing. But Sarah Cloyce was actually Rebecca Nurse's sister, and so Parris was preaching about the recent witch accusations. And Sarah Cloyce was conveniently named by John Indian. Do you remember who John Indian was?
Yes. Wasn't he with Tituba?
Yes.
Yes.
He's Tituba's husband, Samuel Parris's servant.
Ka-ching!
So are you seeing the interwebbed thing we got going on here between the Parrises and the Putnams? Sarah Cloyce had her share of misery, though, and she had fled an Indian raid and spent years in poverty as the widowed mother of 5. Her life had been far more difficult than Rebecca's, but she definitely fit the mold of the outspoken, down-on-her-luck widow of the typical accused witch of the time. During her hearing, according to Schiff, John Indian identified Sarah Cloyce as one of the tormentors. She had asked him, "When did I hurt thee?" "A great many times," he replied, to which Sarah responded, "Oh, you were a grievous liar." Which I can imagine a lot more emotion put into that.
Yeah.
Which never goes well for these women in these hearings. Abigail Williams was a huge part of this hearing as well, and she claimed that there was a company of witches at the Harris house, which included Sarah Cloyce and Sarah Good. She said that they ate and drank, which was their sacrament. She claimed a devil's Sabbath had taken place that day of the public fast. Abigail stated that Cloyce and Good served as deacons at the service, held just behind the parsonage, and she claimed there were 40 witches there.
40? Where did she get that number?
I don't know. She pulled it out of her ass.
Probably.
Like everything else.
I mean, 40 is a very biblical number, so I wouldn't be surprised. That's why.
Is it? 40 days and 40 nights?
40 days, 40 nights for Noah. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness.
Moses was lost with the...
Yes.
That was 40 years.
Yeah, but still 40, yeah.
Interesting. I didn't even think about that.
47.
3 days.
Yes. Yes. Until he rose again. Yes, 3's good. So yeah, it's a very biblical number. So
It was then Elizabeth Proctor's turn. Elizabeth Proctor was accused on April 4th, 1692, also by John Indian, who accused her when the other girls refused not to. One of the girls protested that she had never seen Elizabeth Proctor before. 2 were struck dumb. Abigail stuck her fist into her mouth, and Elizabeth Hubbard fell into a long trance. So basically, what I'm gathering from this, none of the girls wanted to testify against Elizabeth. But it was interpreted by the court that this was all Elizabeth's doing instead of, maybe she's not a witch.
yeah, like Elizabeth was getting them to do that so they wouldn't testify.
So here comes John Indian again to the rescue. John claimed that a scantily clad Elizabeth Proctor had choked him. He wishes. Once he had testified, the floodgates opened as the girls rallied and supplied additional information. Yes, please, let's allow hormonal tweens and teens to run this show. John Proctor was also to be indicted on April 11, 1692, on 3 charges of witchcraft against Mary Walcott, who was a neighbor of the Putnams, Mary Warren, and Mercy Lewis, and was examined the same day. These charges came after he tried to stand up for his wife during her hearing.
I'm surprised that these women, their menstrual cycles were not blamed for this. Really? I mean, I'm thinking back to Elizabeth and all the stuff that she went through and how her menstrual cycle was a big part. I'm surprised that's not brought in here.
Yeah. I'm surprised not either. I mean, it depends. The youngest one was 9 and 12. Like Betty Paris was 9. I mean, depending on when they started their menses.
Maybe TMI for everybody, but I started in 5th grade. I know it depends on your body and what your mom's cycle started, but you start young.
Yeah, they do.
TMI, everybody. Sorry.
John Proctor was also to be indicted on April 11th, 1692, on 3 charges of witchcraft against Mary Walcott, who is a neighbor of the Putnams, Mary Warren, and Mercy Lewis, and he was examined that same day. And these charges came after he tried to stand up for his wife during her hearing. The next to be accused would be Bridget Bishop. Abigail Hobbs, Mary Warren actually found herself accused at this time, and Giles Corey on April 18th.
Sorry, everybody. It's just Kenzie.
It's Kenzie.
It's our pup.
The next day, they are all arrested and examined. And according to Schiff, Giles Corey was an obvious target, and he had a scandalous reputation.
Ooh, do tell.
Do tell. Years back, he had stolen wheat, flax, tobacco, and a host of other things from a warehouse, which happened to belong to the father of Justice Corwin.
Oh, I was hoping it was scandalous, like he showed his ankle or something.
No. But it's interesting that the warehouse he stole from just happened to belong to a father of Corwin.
I do like how you're finding out these details where the families are intertwined. There is
big time
family feuds going on and the clans rivaling. So I like how you're pinpointing those areas, because for me, when I only read The Witches by Stacy Schiff, she doesn't really get into that. So for someone that is just a basic Salem Witch Trials like me, you don't see this stuff. So I'm kind of glad you're pointing that stuff out.
Yeah, and I think all of this plays a very important role
with
how crazy it went. So Corey had fetched a load of wood while he was supposed to be serving watch, then lied about it in court. He had exchanged blows with the local schoolmaster, whom he doused with dirty water, of which he was prosecuted for.
Wasn't all the water then dirty? Like,
for realsies. He was prosecuted for brawling and disturbing the peace. In 1676, he savagely beat a thief with a stick, delivering near 100 blows, and tried to convince others that the thief had taken a fall.
Okay.
He's just blunt force trauma, all over, and he just had a fall. So there's a laundry list of things that Corey did that would make him in the crosshairs of the pious Puritan, or Putnam, just saying. I'm not biased at all. Mary Warren's hearing was next on the docket. Remember that Mary Warren was at first an accuser. Her initial fits ended when John Proctor allegedly beat them out of her. The two had been in conflict since the beating, and Mary had posted a note of gratitude on the community bulletin board, and this was actually common practice of the time. This is where you could learn who the new fence viewer was or who had not properly educated their children.
Oh, God.
Right? Can you imagine, your kid is doing this, you suck at as a parent?
Well, you know what? People are doing just on Facebook now, I guess.
Yeah,
so.
That's true. It's a different kind of wall.
Right.
For being so pious, these Puritans were so full of drama and in each other's business. It's ridiculous. The Proctors were furious at this point, as it was an advertisement of the disorder in their home. In the meantime, Mary had distanced herself from her peers, but this didn't go well for Mary because she soon went from victim to suspect and found herself on the chopping block.
Uh-oh.
She would eventually confess to witchcraft, then submit to afflictions all over again. And I'm kind of glad that she isn't my Mary Warren, because she's a little psycho here. She keeps flopping back and forth. But at the same time, I get the feeling that she is experiencing her own struggles. For one, she's an orphan. Her mother and her sister died. She's being abused by her master, so I can kind of empathize with her a little bit. But I also think that Hawthorne and Corwin may have had a role in convincing Mary to flip-flop. When she was questioned, she seemed uncertain herself as to which side she was on. For some time, she stood entranced, and then launched into a tearful apology. She promised to tell all, but it was still unsure as to which side she was apologizing and what she meant to tell. She was dismissed from the room to recover several times until the ministers and justices finally deposed her in private. After a night in prison, she was a little more forthcoming. I bet she was.
Mm-hmm.
That night she left the note. Apparently Elizabeth Proctor forced Mary from her bed and confessed to Mary that she was a witch, because, that makes a lot of sense. Apparently, Salem witches tended to supply formal introductions and presenting their credentials up front. Mary might have surmised, given that her mistress read so much. Elizabeth owned a number of books, traveling always with one in her pocket. And yet another reason that I would have been tried for witchcraft.
Yeah. Trying to educate yourself.
Yeah.
God forbid.
Mary also claimed that John Proctor had bullied her and threatened her to keep their secrets. He had confided in her that his wife exasperated him. She claimed John Proctor demanded that she sign the book, and if she did not, he would not save her during her next tumble into the fire or water. Mary also claimed that John Proctor had bullied her and threatened her to keep their secrets. He had confided in her that his wife annoyed him. She claimed John Proctor demanded that she sign the devil's book, and if she did not, he would not save her when she would tumble into the fire of hell. Just kidding. I don't know if it was of hell, but basically the premise is that if you don't sign the book and if you don't keep my secrets, I'm not going to save you.
Are you talking about the lake of fire?
It could be.
The fire and brimstone talk of the church is all about the lake of fire. So maybe that's where the water part coming in. Maybe.
Basically, he wouldn't save her. Let's forget the fire and water.
On your own.
Yeah. You guys pray on that. Think about it. Ponder. These happen to be the precise words, and maybe that's why they weren't making sense to me, the precise words that Paris had used in describing parents dangling children before dangers only to rescue them, educating by the way of false alarms. So Mary eventually confessed to being a witch, but was eventually released from prison in June of 1692. She only spent 2 months in jail, while other confessed witches were locked up for over a year. And that's probably because she flip-flopped to the other side. Abigail Hobbs' hearing was also that day, and this one, in Hawthorne's opinion, delivered the richest rewards. 14-year-old Hobbs lived just over the village line in Topsfield, and she had been bragging for over a year in some accounts about her un-Puritan childhood. She cavorted in the woods at night. She mocked her stepmother.
Cavorted.
And she had been chided by a friend for her rudeness. Hobbs would boast of her invincibility, and she feared nothing, having already sold her soul to the devil. Hobbs had told Hawthorne that she had signed many pacts. The first one, which was in Casco Bay, in Maine, 80 miles north, where she had survived an Indian raid 3 years before. Abigail was able to describe how she managed the spectral pricks. The devil provided her with thorns that she would drive into wooden images. During her hearing, she didn't know anything about witches' meetings, but conveniently, the following day, after she spent a night in prison, she did remember. I think Abigail was what you could call a delinquent at that time. This is a girl who obviously had shit going on, and I'm willing to bet a lot of this was related to PTSD after witnessing attacks from the Native Americans.
Yeah.
The Wabanaki tribe is the one that constantly attacks up there. Her mother had died, so she has a stepmother, and God knows what she was experiencing in her home life. She may have just not given two shits about what people thought. Or it could be extreme attention-seeking behavior. She may not have gotten attention unless it was for the negative attention, in which, you know, Hannah, negative attention is attention.
Exactly.
Bridget Bishop's hearing was next. She was the only one of the 4 that day that had been previously accused of witchcraft, and she would prove to be more defiant than even Giles Corey. Bishop was a middle-aged resident of Salem town in her early 50s and had a history of petty theft. She and her former husband had fought bitterly and on more than one occasion showed up with bruises. So already, Bishop fit all the witchcraft boxes. She had already been accused, check. She was a woman on the outskirts of society, check. She was outspoken, check. And as we have seen with Hugh and Mary Parsons, there were visible signs of discord in the marriage, check. But what is amusing, at least to me, is that in 1677 she had landed in court for having called her husband an old rogue and an old devil on the Sabbath.
My kind of girl.
Yeah. And get this, they had been whipped for this 8 years earlier. So this has been going on. And I want to reiterate that if those were the kinds of things that would land a woman in court, I definitely would have found myself there.
Oh, yes, multiple times.
Old rogue. Both her and her husband stood for an hour, gagged, back to back on lecture day in the public market, a paper advertising their offense fastened to their foreheads. Can you imagine that happening? Especially the community being so involved in your personal relationship.
So small.
Yeah. After this incident, Bridget's husband died under suspicious circumstances. She's a widow. Check. Within right? Within 8 months, at odds with her neighbors and with her stepchildren, saddled by debts, she stood trial for witchcraft. All of these check boxes are why Bridget would end up being the first one who was tried and executed for witchcraft. But we will talk more about that later. A few days later, on April 22nd, 1692, 9 suspects were arrested on witchcraft charges. Edward and Sarah Bishop, William and Deliverance Hobbs, Abigail's father and stepmother, Mary Esty, the wife of the richest merchant, and Rebecca Nurse's other sister, Nehemia Abbott, a black slave, Mary Black, Mary English, and Sarah Wilds, and they are examined by Hawthorne and Corwin. It is important to note that at this point in the trials that every suspect that appeared before Hawthorne wound up in prison to await trial regardless of their plea. Makes me think somebody's got an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
During Deliverance Hobbs' hearing, Mercy Lewis was unable to identify her. Same with Abigail Williams. But guess who saved the day? Anne fucking Putnam.
Oh, damn Putnams.
Anne claimed that Deliverance had tortured her. Deliverance, most likely knowing how the previous hearings had gone, tried to play her hand. She claimed that she was afflicted too, and in that same room a week earlier, she had seen birds, cats, dogs, and a human apparition who just happened to be Mercy Lewis. She rejected Hawthorne's prompts. There wasn't an apparition that asked her to sign a book. Hawthorne became annoyed with this situation, and the 2 youngest girls, probably encouraged to some extent, pointed at the ceiling and stated that Hobbs was not at the bar where they could not see her, but she was above their heads on the meeting house beam.
Oh, good Lord.
Like, seriously? This is proof to me of how shady all this shit was. How did people actually believe this? This is evidence that someone, probably the Putnams, had an agenda, or Hawthorne, or Corwin, and these girls were the monkeys performing on demand. It's ridiculous. They are only picking things that fit their narrative and dismissing evidence that doesn't even count. I don't know what your thoughts are, Hannah.
I mean, my thoughts as in a scientific field is I need data, and scientific proof. And the one I keep thinking about the most, which I know you haven't brought up, is when they talk about them having a mole and that's the sign of Satan. I mean, I know people can't see me right now, but I have several moles. Does that mean I'm a witch?
Yeah. I identify as a chocolate chip cookie.
Right.
So,
I mean, it's crazy the accusations that were coming out during these days. But something I do remember from going to Salem, and we went on this wonderful tour of this house. Of course, now I can't remember the name of it, but I'll have to come out and tell you. But the tour guide was wonderful, and he was very much about these people were all about their religion and their fear. And I think that the people of the church were a big driving force in all of this because they could control the people through fear.
oh yeah. I mean, we still see that today.
Absolutely.
COVID shots.
Yeah.
The pandemic.
Yes.
Just saying. Deliverance must have felt that she was losing her battle because she blurted out that Sarah Wilds, the constable's mother, had brought her a book with a pen and ink to sign. Deliverance said afterwards that she made the acquaintance of a tall black man with a high-crowned hat and eventually admitted torturing the girls. Deliverance would eventually provide Hawthorne with 11 names who attended the witches' meeting. She affirmed that those previous accused were in attendance and omitted the names of the women who had already confessed. Her husband, William, on the other hand, denied everything. He remained steadfast despite the girls' behavior in the courtroom, and he had said to Hawthorne, "I can speak in the presence of God safely, as I must look to give account another day, that as I am clear as a newborn babe, you may judge your pleasure my soul is clear." He remained in jail until December 17, 1692, when 2 of his neighbors paid his bill, and William was officially cleared of charges on May 11th, 1693.
Sorry, I just want to say that I wasn't laughing at the fact that he wasn't innocent. It's just the way that he described it as a newborn babe.
A newborn babe.
By the way, the tour is for the Daniels house. Yes, the Daniels house tour.
In Salem?
Yes, it is fabulous. Mm-hmm. Me and my brother went last year, me and Jonathan. Fabulous tour. The gentleman is wonderful, and he actually lives in the house.
Really?
Yes, and he is all about the house being accessible, meaning you can sit in the furniture and you can touch things. It's not a house museum. And he's all about, you guys should be able to access this house because this stuff was made centuries ago. Mm-hmm. And it's still working fine. Like, I want you to, like, he has you sit, he makes you tea. It's wonderful.
I wanna go.
So I highly recommend.
On my list. So now we will take a moment and thank Lynn from Springfield for her contribution.
Thank you, Lynn from Springfield.
And if you guys, you wanderers out there, feel so inclined to support us because we are doing this for fun, because we love the research and we love to talk about it, visit our website, wickedwanderingspodcast.com, to make a donation as little as $3 a month to support our podcast so we can continue doing this.
Please.
So we can get better mics, and maybe with that money, I'll learn how to say words. I mean,
we'll
that's
get you a speech pathologist.
Yes. And that is less than a pumpkin spice latte a day.
So if you love us more than a pumpkin spice latte, please donate.
Yes, please. Since you guys are here listening, you must be a fan of the podcast.
Woohoo!
And if you want to show your support, head over to wickedwanderingpodcast.com. Click on the support tab and choose a monthly subscription starting at just $3 a month. Your contributions will directly fuel our podcast production, and as a thank you, we'll give you a shout out in every episode.
Woohoo! And you know what might be fun too? If like we will say your name and like your favorite haunting place, murder mystery, or serial killer. We would love to know.
Now back to the show. Edward and Sarah Bishop were accused at the same time as Deliverance and William. They ran a tavern out of their home, and Sarah was the stepdaughter of Sarah Wilds. So not only with the accusers is there familial connection, but also with some of the accused as well.
Can you make like a family tree? And then when you're making the family trees, I want you to make a town tree.
Yes.
Because that would really help.
I will do that for our next episode.
Really?
And I will post it. No, I love doing this shit. I'm such a nerd. I will post it on our Instagram.
Oh my God. I think that'd be, at least for me, I'm such a visual person. When you're saying, yeah, they're connected, it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. And there's also a map of how the justices are related as well. And that's in the Storm of Witchcraft. So that one I don't have to draw. I'll just take a picture of it. So Sarah and Edward had 12 children together. Can you imagine?
Yes, her vagina. Gosh.
Right? It's blown out. Anyway, Reverend John Hale would testify against Sarah, saying that she was a moral threat to society. She kept an untidy home and entertained people at all hours of the night.
Oh, heathen.
Drinking and playing shovelboard.
Shuffleboard.
I do declare. But they ran a tavern. So yes, she had people over drinking at all hours of the night.
It's not like she's doing strip poker.
Yeah.
I'll take my corset off. Sorry.
Royal flush. I read an interesting story about Sarah. Well, more so their neighbor, Christian Trask. And this comes from SalemWitchMuseum.com. And about 2 years before the Salem fiasco, Trask felt bewitched. This is such a cool story. I think you'll like it, even though it's sad. Trask felt bewitched after an altercation with Sarah. She started to have seizures and her health started to decline. Trask ended her own life by stabbing herself in the neck with scissors.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Sarah wasn't accused at that time, which could have been due to her father being the constable. But if there was anything in the 1600s that would warrant a witchcraft accusation, I am shocked that this wasn't it. Like, this should have been, if any of the other things were, but this one wasn't, Just, it's totally normal for people to stab themselves in the neck with a pair of scissors.
Ow.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
However, this also didn't help her reputation. So both Edward and Sarah were found to have committed witchcraft against, of course, Ann Putnam, Mercy Lewis, and Abigail Williams. They were jailed in Salem, then in Boston, and their property was seized. They eventually escaped from jail for a short time and were able to avoid execution. And after their trial, their son was able to recover their property. So Mary Esty, I've seen it both ways. It's like Easty or Esty. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. Easty and Esty. Or I should just call her Etsy, because that's what I've been doing as I'm like reading to myself.
What's her first name again?
Mary.
Yeah, Mary E.
Mary E. was also examined at this time. She was the other sister of Rebecca Nurse. And I'm just saying that someone really had it out for this family. And this is too much to be a coincidence to me.
Well, I think you've planned that. Yeah.
In 1655, Mary had married Isaac E., a farmer and barrel maker from Topsfield. They had 7 children and owned one of the largest farms in Salem Village. Somehow, I feel like that makes them a target. But according to the website historyofmassachusetts.org, Mary E. had a good reputation in Salem, and there was little reason she would have been accused of witchcraft. Many historians suspect that the reason she was accused was most likely due to bad blood between her and the Putnams, and due to the fact that she was directly related to several suspected witches. The shitty thing about Mary E.'s situation is that she was released from jail on May 18th on her own recognizance, because her name had not been mentioned in recent claims. However, fucking Mary Lewis becomes sick and is on her deathbed, claiming that Mary is tormenting her, and Mary is arrested 48 hours later.
Gosh.
And then Mercy Lewis is miraculously healed. And spoiler alert, Mary E. is eventually executed. But we'll get to that part later. Next episode. The next few names are ones that I've never heard of in regard to the Salem Witch Trials. The first one being Nehemiah Abbott. Have you ever heard of that name?
Is it Nehemiah?
He definitely wasn't mentioned in the witches book.
That's a biblical name.
Right?
Wait, Nehemih?
Yeah.
Nehemiah.
Because
I think that's actually a book in the Bible.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a book in the Bible.
I mean, it's been a few years since I've read the Bible. But this kind of makes sense because 30-year-old Nehemiah.
It's like a silent H. I mean, that's at least how I was taught.
Was the only person to be accused of witchcraft in 1692 that was set free after his examination, and the afflicted could not confirm his identity. So maybe that's why he's mentioned. But also, I think it's important to mention that fact, that he was the only person. I guess Ann Putnam didn't come through on that one.
Yeah, she dropped the ball.
Despite the accusations of spectral torment by Mary Walcott and Ann Putnam, Abbott insisted on his innocence, saying, "I speak before God that I am clear from this accusation." After being cautioned by the magistrates to be sure that they were right, the accusers started to have doubts. It seems that maybe the girls weren't coached enough before this examination, and Abbott was set free. Heavy sarcasm on that. But it's also interesting that we see here is that the women say the same thing. Like Martha Corey said she's innocent. I'm I'm a pious woman. I believe in God. I go to church. I'm innocent. But every single man so far who has said that he's innocent has been let off. Just thought I'd bring that to attention.
I think it's a very valid point.
Yeah.
Women weren't believed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think back then, I mean, sorry to interrupt you,
No,
but
you're
I think if we're looking from a Puritan Christian lens, that since Eve was the one that encouraged Adam to sin.
Because Adam is so blameless.
Right. That women are evil. And since we are from man, then that's why, you know, it's God's will that we bow down to whatever the man needs. And since we're the evil ones, you know, if you're going all back to that Genesis and everything. So it's awful, but it's not surprising.
Mm. I mean, what are men doing now without women to blame? Right? I mean, that's a question. I don't know. Just putting that out there.
I think that, you know, men and women both have things to add to the world, but I also think that we need to have more women in power. Just saying.
I nominate you, Hannah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I'll vote for you for president. Alrighty.
No student loans. Woo! Woo!
Mary Black is another name I never heard before, but also important for a reason.
She wasn't in the witch's book? That sounds familiar.
I don't think so. I don't remember her name. She was an enslaved black woman. Well, tell me if you remember her.
Yeah.
She was an enslaved black woman of Nathaniel Putnam, which I thought was interesting. Even though the Putnams were heavily involved in the witch trials, he remained skeptical as to the validity of the witchcraft. Oh, a Putnam with a brain.
He must have got all of them then.
Yeah, probably. Mary was arrested, and the reason on the warrant was listed as high suspicion of witchcraft, performed on the usuals, Ann Putnam, Mercy Lewis, and Mary Walcott. The girls threw fits during her examination, and she eventually was indicted and imprisoned. After spending almost a year in prison, she was brought to trial in January of 1693. No one appeared to testify against her when the time came, which led to her release by the end of the month. By 1693, the support for the witch trials began to wane, with orders such as spectral evidence no longer being admissible in court, and the official ending of the Court of Oyer and Terminer, and the prohibiting of further witch-related arrests, which we will talk about more in the next episode. It is also possible that due to her enslaver being a Putnam and an important figure in Salem, that it no longer seemed opportune or it didn't fit narrative. But some historians believe that her accusation was in retaliation for his defense of Rebecca Nurse. So he actually defended Rebecca Nurse when she was accused as well.
What family was Tituba a part of?
The Paris's servant.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Sarah Wilds was also accused by, you'll never guess, the Putnams. Well, by Thomas Putnam on behalf of Ann Putnam, Mary Walcott, and Mercy Lewis. I'm really seeing a pattern with these three amigos, aren't you? Like I mentioned before, Sarah is the stepmother to Sarah Bishop. Bishop and her husband were brought in at the same time. Not all the documentation survived her examination, but an afflicted girl, Sarah Bibber, a name that I hadn't heard of, claimed to see Wilde's spirit sitting on the beam in the meeting house. Sarah claimed her innocence, but the judges stated that the girl's behavior in the courtroom was clear evidence that she had been tormenting them. She was eventually indicted on one charge of witchcraft against Mercy Lewis. And the shitty thing about Sarah Wildes is that she was the wife of a local judge. But she had a bad reputation due to previous brushes with the law. And get this. In 1649, she was accused of fornicating out of wedlock. And in 1663, she was accused of wearing a silk scarf.
So scandalous.
I'm serious. Rob's looking at me like I'm crazy, but this shit is real.
That's sexual material.
Yeah. Maybe it was the scarf that forced her to fornicate. After she married John Wildes in 1663, which this sucks for Sarah, the brother and sister of his late wife developed a hatred for her, and I guess it was not long after the first wife died but they started spreading rumors that she was a witch. And apparently that paid off nearly 30 years later in 1692. So 30 years after she got married.
Oh, my word.
The final couple we'll be talking about was arrested at the same time. And Baker theorized that they may have been accused as a backlash of his wealth and his position as a Salem selectman. Or it could have been because of his support in the Anglican Church. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Anglican, yeah.
Anglican. Mary was a devout and well-educated woman. Oh, this is Mary and Philip English. She was also descended from one of the town's first families. She was arrested April 21st, but Philip evaded arrest through May. He would hide behind bags of laundry in the homes of friends in Boston. Yeah. They were also named by Thomas Putnam on behalf of the afflicted girls, but there was one that stole the show, and it wasn't Ann Putnam for once.
That must have really killed her mojo.
Right. And it was 18-year-old Susanna Sheldon. Susanna, like Abigail Hobbs and Mercy Lewis, had grown up in the Maine frontier and had been driven from there twice by the Wabanaki tribe. And hers is really a sad story because she had lost her father, her brother, and uncle. And when her brother's body was recovered, it was scalped and mutilated. The remaining Sheldons moved to Salem in 1688. Fast forward to 1692, Susanna claimed that Philip had lunged over the pews to pinch her in a meeting, that he bit her and threatened to slit her throat. He had consorted with a figure with a high crown hat, and Sheldon saw Mary English with a yellow bird on her breast, or her teat, and claimed that Mary had been a witch for 20 years. Although I'm not sure how she knew that because she was 18 years old, but maybe Mary had told her. By June, Philip had joined his wife in jail, and they eventually escaped before they could stand trial with the help of Reverend Moody, and fled to New York, which ultimately saved them from their execution. Keep in mind, all of this started at the end of January, like I said before, and that is when the first fit started with Abigail Williams and Betty Paris. We are now at the end of April. So far, 23 people have been accused for witchcraft who have been held over for trial. 23 people in 2 months. May was a busy month for Salem, and it brought the arrest of George Burroughs, who was a major player in the Salem Witch Trials. May introduces us to Judge William Staunton, who is also lieutenant governor and a douche canoe. This guy had something to prove, whomever it was, and he killed a lot of innocent people, trying to show that he had a big dick, apparently, and he could handle things in the colony. I mean, that's my opinion, of course. The end of May brought the creation of the Court of Oyer and Terminer by Sir William Phipps, the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. But until then, Hawthorne and Corwin continued their shenanigans. And on May 2nd, 1692, Dorcas Hoare, what a rather unfortunate name, Lydia Dustin, Sarah Morey, and Susanna Martin are arrested and examined by Hawthorne and Corwin. 58-year-old Dorcas was well known to the court, and she practiced as a palm reader. She had predicted deaths and infirmities, sicknesses, and she had a tendency to appear just before people fell ill. So Hoare fit the part of this witch. She was the middle-aged woman who trimmed her gray hair short, save for a dark, matted, 4.5-foot-long ponytail. So Dorcas is like the epitome of what I picture as an actual witch, you know? The look on your face is like, oh. Her husband...
Sorry, they can't see my face.
I know.
I have to verbalize, Hannah.
Her husband had died suddenly that previous winter, and when the coroner's jury called to examine the body, she insulted the men and called them wicked wretches if they took her for a murderer. During her hearing, the afflicted girls went into convulsions when she entered the meeting house. They claimed she admitted to killing her husband and a woman in Boston as well. Susanna Sheldon showed up again and joined the accusers. And when the afflicted girls described Dorcas's cats, the book, and the black man whispering into their ears, Dorcas exploded, "Oh, you liars, and God will stop the mouths of liars." Hawthorne reprimanded her, saying, "You are not to speak in this manner in this court." Dorcas then responded, "I will speak the truth as long as I live." She was taken back to jail and held over for trial. There's a few more before we end the episode, but 71-year-old widow Susanna Martin, and a side note that most of these end up being executed, which is why I'm covering them. 71-year-old widow Susanna Martin was next, and she could hardly take the proceedings seriously. She had already been accused of witchcraft decades earlier, like a couple of them, and her husband had sued for slander on her behalf and won, but the accusations continued. Martin was said to have bewitched a woman to insanity, murdered her own infant, and born an imp. She accused a man of theft, quarreled freely with her children, and challenged her seat in the meeting house. There were 8 accusers that stood before her that day, and Ann Putnam actually threw a glove at her during the hearing, and Martin began laughing. Martin thought it was ridiculous and did not believe the girls were bewitched at all, and claimed to have no compassion towards them. This shocked Hawthorne. He told her that the entire community thinks she was guilty, and she replied, "Let them think what they will." Susanna Martin was a badass, and she did not give a shit.
Well, at that point, it's like, if I say I'm not, they're not going to freaking listen anyways.
No matter what I do.
Yeah. And with the glove thing, didn't that used to mean they wanted to duel?
Oh, I did not think of that.
Yeah. So if you throw a glove in someone's face, they wanted to duel.
That would have been exciting. Ann Putnam finally getting her ass kicked.
Seriously.
Unfortunately for Susanna Martin, her badass ended back up in jail and was headed over for trial. There was little I could find about Lydia Dustin and Sarah Morey. They were both held in jail until 1693, but were only set free when they were able to pay her bill. Unfortunately, Lydia died in prison before she was able to pay.
Oh.
Morey, on the other hand, was held until February of 1693 and was cleared of all charges. And her mom was actually able to petition for compensation for the time she spent in prison. Yeah. George Burroughs. So George Burroughs is like one of what I like to call the heavy hitters. He plays a big role, and he also knows a lot of people. He knows the justices, he knows the Putnams, and he's a reverend, a minister. And so during his hearings, I think he thought that it's mostly women that are held over or accused.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that he really anticipated it to go the way it went. But there's parts of George Burroughs where I think, like Jamie Fraser.
From Outlander?
Yes. And I'll tell you why when I point them out. And then there's other parts where I'm like, okay, maybe because he's kind of a dick in other parts. But for the good parts, I envision Jamie Fraser.
Jamie can have his dick moments.
Yeah. Yes, he can. Oh, anyways. So he was accused and arrested on May 4th in Wells, Maine. Now, since we're mentioning dicks, he had some big dick energy. He was the first minister in Salem, right, that we talked about. And he left when the villagers refused to pay him. Burroughs had also borrowed money from the Putnams because of it, it resulted in a falling out between families. Hawthorne and Corwin mixed things up a bit for Burroughs' hearing, and I am trying to figure out why this was. And it is because they believe that Burroughs really was at the root of all the, did they believe he was at the root of all this witchcraft? Or was it because the interactions between him and the Putnams in the past? Or the rumors of his unearthly strength? Let's go into the Burroughs history for a second. He grew up in Maryland with both of his parents, and he was the only child. He moved to Massachusetts with his mother in 1657 as his father was a merchant mariner. Or mariner? I don't know. You guys decide.
Mariner, yeah, good.
And traveled the coast. Burroughs graduated from Harvard in 1670, and his parents eventually returned to England, leaving him on his own. In 1674, he married and served as a schoolmaster, and he joined the Roxbury Church and became a father. He would soon accept the position as minister in Casco Bay, Maine, which was slightly smaller than Salem and a part of what is now Portland, Maine. I was just there.
I love Portland.
Yes, they have some good duck fat fries. Moving on. There were some differences between the people of Eastern Maine and the Puritans. Irregularities tended to creep up into the preaching as the clergymen made concessions to their flocks. So basically, with the frontier, there weren't as many people. They were spread out. and there were multiple religions, but they didn't have very many ministers. And so as a minister, he was preaching to a bunch of different faiths. The frontier towns submitted to Massachusetts jurisdiction at this time, but in the process, they traded religious freedom for military protection. The colonial elite, and this part is interesting, or at least I thought it was, that may have something to do with the trials. The colonial elite of Massachusetts, which included the Salem justices, had a large financial interest in Maine's fishing and lumber industries. Even with their financial interests, officials washed their hands of the vulnerable frontier. In 1690, Peckerheads, Hawthorne, and Corwin suggested Massachusetts withdraw their soldiers from the frontier, which yielded disastrous results. And at this time, Maine was still getting attacked by the Wabanaki, which cost many colonists their lives. And because all of this, Burroughs was not offered an official church, nor was he ever ordained. The Wabanaki burnt down the house of a previous minister, so the town could not provide him a home. But they were able to provide him 200 acres of prime land.
Ooh.
Burroughs was in his mid-20s when the attacks continued in Costco. Get your bulk items. Just kidding, I'm losing it. During one attack, Burroughs managed to lead a group of 10 men, 6 women, and 16 children to a lush island, where they survived some time on fish and berries before being rescued and evacuated to safety. Okay, this is Jamie Fraser shit and the big dick energy. After this attack, he was living out as an occasional minister until the Salem villagers found him to install him with the Putnams. Burroughs moved back to Casco in 1683, where his former parish heartily welcomed him back. And 6 years later, Casco, now larger than Salem Village, found itself in the middle of King William's War. There had been contention between England and the French well before England declared war against the French in 1689. And according to Schiff, in September of 1689, more than 400 French and Indians descended on the town with a roar. Burroughs joined the 7-hour battle waged in a field and orchard. 250 settlers were either killed or taken captive. It was after this attack that Mercy Lewis was orphaned and moved in with the Burroughs family. And Burroughs was widowed for the second time and retreated down the coast to Wells. So Wells, at this time, was now the frontier as everything east had been destroyed. Mid-June of 1691, the Wells livestock and fields were destroyed. Burroughs joined a late July appeal for provisions to the Massachusetts Council. He pleaded for clothes and salt because without it, the corn supply would only last 6 months. The enemy was expected daily. The Wabanaki captured a 17-year-old when he went out for wood. And as the first witchcraft accusations emerged, the Wabanaki killed and carried off half of the neighboring town. They marched 50 captives through the snow up to Canada. And they slaughtered sheep, cattle, and horses. And Burroughs painted a picture of pillars of smoke, the raging of merciless flames, the insults of the heathen enemy, shooting, shouting, hacking, and not having regard to the earnest supplications of men, women, or children, and dragging away others with no help. I tell you about this account from Schiff to give you insight to first what Burroughs was experiencing at the time of the witch trials, and secondly, how stressful these attacks were on everyone in the colony. Can you imagine witnessing any of this and what it would do to someone, let alone like a young girl like Susanna and Mercy?
Trauma.
Yeah, major trauma. And also, I'd imagine I kind of experienced this when I came home from Iraq, but when you're dealing with so much horror and trauma, I mean, I didn't go through anything like that, but you kind of think that the day-to-day complainings of people are like so minuscule compared. And I can imagine that Burroughs had that opinion of the Salem Witch Trials. And he's like, I just saved lives. And this is what you're doing. Like, this is what you're worried about. There's like a real threat going on. Burroughs had done many brave and heroic things, which caused Hawthorne and Corwin to do things a little different. Firstly, they added 2 additional justices, 40-year-old Samuel Sewell, whose brother was currently housing Paris's daughter down the road from the meeting house, and another connection with the Paris and Putnams. But also, Burroughs and Sewell had known each other at Harvard, and they had socialized over years. And this is where douche canoe William Stoughton makes his first appearance as one of the justices. He was the former Massachusetts deputy president and soon-to-be lieutenant governor of Massachusetts. The presence of the two men spoke the gravity of the situation. That's cute. Secondly, Hawthorne and Corwin. You guys can't see this, but Rob and Hannah were playing footsie.
I did not start anything.
Saw it out of the corner of my eye. But, as you were, keep on keeping on. The presence of the two men spoke to the gravity of the situation. Secondly, Hawthorne and Corwin built a special case for Burroughs, obtaining evidence from 16 people, and they conducted it in private. Yeah.
Sketch.
Which it took place in Ingersoll's Tavern. They first inquired when the last time Burroughs had taken communion. Burroughs stated that it had been so long he couldn't remember exactly when it was, but he had recently attended a morning meeting in Boston and one in Charleston. Because, saving lives and fending off the Wabanaki wasn't important enough. All that mattered was if he had taken communion. He was then questioned about his supposed haunted house. I love this story too. His second wife had complained of visitations in the night, and the slave swore to have seen a white calf bolt from the roof, race along the chimney, and flew down the stairs. On another occasion, his wife felt a rustle by the bed and breathe on her while she laid by his side. It was haunted back in the 1600s. He denied the house was haunted, but also, why was this not considered a visit from a familiar like other people claimed? We've already discussed that witches can take on animal shapes, so who's to say that this was a haunting and not a witch attack, like it had been for others?
Yeah.
Oh, that's probably because it didn't fit into Hawthorne and Corwin's agenda.
Just that conveniently kept changing.
Right? When I first started researching, I wanted, like I said, to imagine him as Jamie Fraser. Sam Hewen, if you listen to I'm just kidding. We both know that he wouldn't. Maybe we should tag him on Instagram. Like, we love you. Anyways, I need to calm down. It's getting hot here. Seeing how he saved lives and apparently was able to shoot a 7-foot shotgun with one hand, which is why I imagine him. But we also find out that he might have kind of been a dick to his wives. But we also need to consider the sources. Well, some of them. According to Schiff, the Putnams were far from alone in testifying against Burroughs. And they lived with Putnams for a while, and they claimed that Burroughs and his wife, he was very sharp with his wife. His wife, Sarah, reportedly lived in fear of her husband as he scolded her mercilessly and say that 5 times fast. Mercilessly and controlled obsessively. Like Hugh Parsons from Springfield, he had told his wife that he had heard every word she uttered in his absence, and told her that my God makes known your thoughts to me.
Oh, brother.
Also like Hugh, a week after his wife had given birth, Burroughs kept her on her feet to berate her at length. There is no proof that Burroughs actually physically abused his wives, like others had claimed, but he also believed in secrets, something that sat poorly with a community dedicated to mutual surveillance. He attempted to silence others and attempted to control what his wife and daughter would say to others. He insisted his wife sign an agreement and that she would reveal none of his private affairs and would not let her send any letters without him reading them first. I mean, I get it to some extent. I'm sure he had plenty experience with the nosy Puritan neighbors to want to keep his business to himself. However, he appeared to be a little controlling about it. Side note, his second wife, Sarah Ruck, was Hawthorne's brother's widow, and her father lived in Salem, where he was about to serve as foreman of a grand jury. Coincidence? I think not.
Think not. This is why we need that tree.
Right? People from Maine who had experienced the Wabanaki raids with him claimed he had Hulk-like strength. Those were my words, not from the book. One witness being Susanna Sheldon, the Maine refugee that had lost most of her family. They claimed that his strength was legendary, as he was a very small, very puny man. Not so Jamie Fraser. Burroughs apparently had hoisted a barrel of molasses with 2 fingers, fired a 7-foot shotgun with one hand.
What?
While a companion had gone off to the fort for help. he had unloaded an entire canoe of provisions by himself. In September of 1689, and in the frontiers of Maine, a strong, stout-hearted leader came in hand, and many admired his fortitude. Some of these claims were second-hand accounts, but some stories Burroughs had boasted about himself, which didn't help in this situation as he tried to explain those things away. But their mind was made up. In all of his abusive and legendary ways, he was a bad man, but a very good wizard. Also in May, George Jacobs Sr. and his granddaughter are arrested on charges of witchcraft, as well as Roger Toothaker, John Alden, Martha Carrier, Elizabeth Howe, and Wilmot Red. George Jacobs Sr. was close to 80 years old and hobbled into his hearing with his tall figure bent over two canes. I kind of imagine the guy from, why can I not think of it? The neighbor on, what's the show with Peter Griffin? Why can't I think of his name?
It's called Family Guy.
Oh.
The old neighbor with those weird, creepy pedophile vibes. But anyway, he was a prosperous long-time Salem farmer. When the afflicted girls testified against him, he asked them to speak up because he couldn't hear them. And he awaited their story.
Didn't have hearing aids back then.
Right. Abigail Williams, Paris's niece, offered her testimony, and Jacobs laughed in response and asked the judges if they really thought this was true. He said that he would admit to witchcraft if they could prove it. Similar to George Burroughs and John Proctor, Jacobs had been firm with his servant, who Schiff said that he very likely beat. A 16-year-old boy would later testify that Jacobs had threatened to drown him. This accusation struck the magistrates weird, as Jacobs had in the past been prosecuted for drowning several horses.
Oh.
Jerk.
I don't have any tolerance for animal abuse.
Me neither. Trapping them in river with a barrage of sticks and stones, and he claimed that he had attempted to run the trespassing animals off his property. I mean, I'm sure there are other ways. Over the next few days of his witchcraft hearing, his specter had beaten the girls with his canes, and they produced pins that he had stuck into their hands. The court had then asked about his religious practices. He admitted he didn't pray. He didn't worship with his family because he couldn't read. And they asked him to say the Lord's Prayer, which was considered by some as a talisman before which evil fled. He made multiple attempts, stumbling every time, which is most likely something that anyone standing in front of the magistrates would have done.
Absolutely.
Jacobs...
Wait, you meant like stumbling over the Lord's Prayer. Yeah. Absolutely.
Jacobs bantered with the judges and stated that he could not help with their inquiry and said they could burn him or hang him. He knew nothing of witchcraft. Jacobs ended up in jail in Boston alongside Burroughs a week later. So now we are starting to see the theme where men are being accused and held over. They are also strong, outspoken men who aren't willing to take any of this lying down, who may or may not have been an enemy to certain citizens. On a sad note, Sarah Osborne, one of the ones that was first accused, died in jail on May 20th, 1692, which is the first death that is the result of the trials. And if you remember Sarah, she was already bedridden when she was accused, and she was already not healthy, but the horrific conditions of the jail, I'm sure, probably killed her sooner. Another event of note that happened on May 14th was that Increase Mather returned to Massachusetts Bay Colony with the new charter and the new governor, Sir William Phips. We briefly mentioned Increase and his son Cotton, and they were both popular ministers of the time. Increase was the president of Harvard, and Cotton was a minister in Boston, where he was for the most part of the witch trials. The father and son duo enjoyed sharing their opinion about the trials, but to me it seemed like they would flip-flop from one side to another depending on who they were talking to. They do play an important role in the trials, but I'm not going to go into them as this would end up being an entire season. But one positive thing about them was that they did not agree with spectral evidence as proof of witchcraft, and that it shouldn't be a reason for the executions to be taking place. So one brownie point from me to the Mathers. Also, we mentioned in the last episode was the fact that the Massachusetts Bay Colony was in between charters, which gave them the authority to settle the colony. New laws would be created under this charter, and it also put Sir William Phips in charge. I must say, too, that it seems to me that Phips wanted nothing to do with the witch trials. He wanted to go up to the frontier of Maine and make a name for himself there, To be able to do this, he created the Court of Oyer and Terminer, which means to hear and determine. And this act alone gave Hawthorne and Corwin and the other magistrates that will be appointed the authority to hold a legit trial for the witchcraft, which is something they wouldn't have been able to do before. And he would put Lieutenant Governor William Douche-Canoe Stoughton in charge of it, which I believe was the descent of an already sinking ship.
I just can't imagine, though, if you're part of the new charter and coming into the witch trials, it's like, nope, I wash my hands of this. I want nothing to do with this.
Yeah, and he actually wanted to go up north to Maine to the fighting going on there.
Yeah, there's bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, and he wanted to make himself a name for himself that way. And then, so on May 27th, 7 judges were appointed: Nathaniel Saltonstall, Bartholomew Gedney, witchcraft, Peter Sargent, Samuel Sewell, Waitstill Winthrop, John Richards, and Jaw Hawthorne, along with Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton as the Chief Justice, which is where we will end this week's episode. When we start next week, we will talk about the actual trials, then discuss why they were so lame and stupid, why William Stoughton was a douche canoe, what are other factors that played in the role of this madness, why it came to an end, and the aftermath. So join us next week, Wanderers, as we finally conclude the Salem Witch Trials. Have a good night or good day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening today. This show wouldn't be possible without our amazing producer and editor, Rob Fitzpatrick, who works tirelessly behind the scenes to bring you the best content.
And a special thanks to Taiga Soundprod for providing the captivating intro music, Cinematic Intro 24.
And of course, we can't forget the hauntingly beautiful outro music, Rhino's Theme, composed by Kevin MacLeod.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms, like Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Your feedback means the world to us.
Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram for behind-the-scenes glimpses, updates, and more thrilling content. You can find us at Wicked Wanderings Podcast.
Thank you so much for listening and being part of our Wicked Wanderings community. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Stay curious,
keep exploring,
and always remember to keep on wandering.
Since you guys are here listening, you must be a fan of the podcast.
Woohoo!
And if you want to show your support, head over to wickedwanderingpodcast.com. Click on the support tab and choose a monthly subscription starting at just $3 a month. Your contributions will directly fuel our podcast production, and as a thank you, we'll give you a shout out in every episode.
Woohoo! And you know what might be fun too? If we will say your name and your favorite haunting place, murder mystery, or serial killer, we would love to know.